I can see that Tuukka has now managed to let most of you in, so maybe we should get started. So a warm welcome to all of you to the fourth session already of Upright's Net Impact and EU Sustainable Finance program. As you all know, we kicked off this program back in September with the aim to understand what does the EU Sustainable Finance regulation concretely mean for investors and for companies, and what kind of requirements actually concern you, and how should all of that be put in the context of your more broad and holistic impact measuring efforts. 2 weeks ago, we had a session about specifically about Article 9 and maybe even like differences between Article 8 and Article 9, and what kind of requirements have to do with specifically classifying yourself as Article 9. 2 weeks before that, so now 4 weeks ago, we talked about the unlisted space specifically and went to the details of how to get this EU regulatory data for companies that don't perhaps do any kind of impact reporting, and even if they do, for some larger companies, there are still some problems with the comparability of the data. Today, it is already November, as your calendar might have suggested. We are talking specifically about reporting. So this is a question that many of you requested when we first started to put together the program. Many of you asked about both, maybe like two sides of the story. One was, what does the EU require from asset managers and from companies? What kinds of formats, like what do the reports concretely look like? We all know about the PI indicators and the EU taxonomy data that we have been talking about throughout the sessions. But then when it comes to concrete reports that need to be put together, what are they really like, and how should one go about it if you don't want to use entire armies of FTEs working on them? And then another question, because all of you know that just ticking the box on EU regulation is hardly bringing you the competitive advantage that you all are seeking, of course, whether as corporations or as investors. Then the question is, what does it then, like 2020's caliber impact reporting really look like, and what kind of a role, if any, does the EU data then play in it? These are some of the questions that you sent us beforehand. Thank you so much for all these questions. We really appreciate, because they guide us through such a vast topic to really focus in these sessions on the things that you most asked about. So many of your questions have to do with the concrete requirements, the EU, many of the details, the differences between the pre-contractual and the periodic reporting, and how can Upright help there, how the EU taxonomy activities are concretely categorized in the Upright platform, also regarding the enabling activities, differences in alignment reporting when it comes to financial products versus financial institutions, and some questions also on what the latest regulation technical standards update really gave or indicated or not. But then on the other hand, you also asked about what kind of role should these EU data points play in your more holistic, broader impact reporting. Some examples of how other investors and other companies are using net impact to really pull together their holistic impact story. And also this relevant question about how to communicate change in a company's or a fund's net impact. Many of you are looking at a situation where maybe some of the companies in your funds, or maybe your company itself, might be net negative to start with. So it's really important to understand how change can be communicated effectively in these kinds of situations. So we will go into that soon. So our agenda today basically has to do with, first of all, giving you a quick, not recap, but update on what the latest RTS update really means. Then going into maybe the biggest beef of today's session, which is the concrete disclosure requirements when it comes to the formats and what should be in them and what they concretely look like. So our CTO, Juho, who has been in this adventure that we call the Upright Project, we have been throwing him at the craziest of of challenges, and now we have put him to read through hundreds, if not thousands, of pages of EU regulatory documents and try to put them in a format that is understandable and clear for all of you. So we are going to do our best to summarize what those requirements concretely say and how you could be handling your data very concretely, and also to explain what we do to make that process as smooth as possible. You all know that we are providing all the data for you, but also when it comes to the formats, when it comes to certain uniform documents and pieces of text that they need to have in them, we have prepared and are preparing templates and making that process for as smooth as possible for you. That's basically the first part of the session. And in the second part of the session, we talk about the stakeholder expectations that are getting higher and higher every day for your impact reporting, and give you a concrete storyline, example storyline of what good looks like these days, and how we are concretely helping investors and companies tell their impact story, looking at the big picture of their impact, communicating the change, integrating in the EU data, and perhaps the UN Sustainable Development Goals or whatever other frameworks you might be looking at. So that is the outline for today. We have quite a lot of things to talk about, so let's get started. Juho, if you go on the next page. So we are also, despite having a lot of content to discuss, we would love to welcome your comments and experiences as companies and investors. As you all know, in this program, we have both corporation participants and investor participants. And one of the great things that we found throughout this program is your active dialogue and active questions for us, and active sharing of experiences of what you, as for example, as a company, would like investors to understand about impact reporting in practice, and how you take the different requirements that maybe your investors are giving you. And then on the other hand, as an investor, what kinds of things would you like companies to take into account and understand from your point of view? So today, we would really love to welcome you spontaneously to share some of these experiences. If you have any input on this, please don't hesitate to just maybe in the chat, just let Toni know. Toni is our moderator today. And you can raise your hand or just ping Toni in the chat if you would like to share your experiences. But we have actually asked a couple of you brave ones to start. So Toni, could we actually start with a couple of experience sharers or commenters already now to give to get everyone started?
Yeah, for sure. Happy to. I think we have a couple of ones, as Annu, you mentioned. I don't know. I think I already saw Dario, the head of sustainability at Impact Sim from Italy, already online here. So Dario, would you like to share from an asset manager perspective what you would like to see on the impact reporting on companies on your own words? So really eager to hear your viewpoint on this topic.
Thank you, Toni, and thank you, Annu, for the introduction. First of all, do you see me well? Because I'm not sure that the camera is correctly framed.
Yeah, so we can see you.
Okay, that's wonderful. So thank you again. I'm really happy and glad to share our experience about the partnership that we have been building with the Upright project. We are a Milan-based asset management company, and we are specialized in listed impact investing strategies. Therefore, according to the new SFDR regulation, we are mainly focused on the development and management of Article 9 products. Therefore, products that have need to explicitly pursue and intentionally pursue sustainability and impact objective. And in order to create an investment process that is adequate for pursuing this objective intentionally in a way that is also specified at the prospectus level, we have found the partnership with Upright absolutely instrumental for building such products. And right now, what we have already launched 2 new Article 9 products. One is called it is a product that has an investment strategy focused on global equity, and the other one is the product focused on Italian equity. And we have used the net impact analysis together with our active proprietary research that we use as a complementary tool, the net impact analysis provided by the Upright project. First of all, how we have used it. First point is that we have set at the portfolio level 2 objectives. The first one is that the portfolio needs always to have a net positive impact measured by the net impact ratio, like the NIR. And secondly, that the coverage of the net impact analysis in the portfolio needs to be at least 90%. So in this respect, by setting these portfolio level limits, we aim on one side to prove and show to all to our current investors that we have always a net positive portfolio, and therefore that we intentionally pursue the objective in a transparent way. And secondly, we think that by setting a positive net impact ratio as a portfolio level objective, we create the correct incentives for portfolio managers in order to select companies that are better able to benefit from the transition to our net positive, to a net zero scenario on one side from the environmental side, and on the other side that are able to generate a net positive social performance. We use therefore the one thing that we truly like about and we find really useful about the net impact analysis is that it is holistic. And going to the second point is that Article 9 products need to take into account also the principle that do no significant harm. And also discussing with different stakeholders recently, having an analysis that is able to take into account both the social and environmental costs and benefits could be used, at least in this initial phase, as basically an indicator measuring the potential negative impacts that derive from a given portfolio. And therefore, by using a net impact measure, such as the NIR, we are able also to handle all the objections related to how we take into account and how we implement the do no significant harm principle. According then, and then I give back the word to you, Tony, according to the other aspect that I was mentioning before, which is basically how we then use the analysis for constructing portfolios, therefore for selecting securities that end up in our portfolios, is that we classify, thanks to the net impact analysis, together then also with other tools that we use for our proprietary research, we classify companies in 2 categories. The first one are net positive companies, therefore companies that can be deemed as already having adopted net positive business models. And on the other, the other classification, the other category is companies that are decreasing their net negative impact, and therefore companies we see them as transitional companies, companies that can truly help us move towards a net zero world, or a world where the net zero transition is conducted and executed in a just way. This is how we have been using the net impact analysis. We are absolutely thrilled to having established this partnership, and honestly, we look forward to contributing to spread in Southern Europe and Italy the net impact mindset for asset management, for investment management strategies, and portfolio construction, because we see it as a huge upgrade with respect to the development of sustainable finance products. This is like a general picture of what we're trying to do here, and what we're trying to do is also thanks to the partnership that we have been building with you.
Yeah, thank you, Dario, for the extensive comments on that. Really glad to hear, and I'm sure there's plenty of implications for individual companies as well on where to focus on when reporting own impact. And from that being said, it would be great to also hear from a company perspective. So do we have Cecilia, the Chief Sustainability Officer from Securitas from Sweden here on the line today?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear and see you. So
great.
Would you like to share your viewpoint on the impact and regulatory reporting on companies?
Yeah, I agree with the previous speaker that for us the net impact rating has been really good. We are I work for Securitas, a private security services company. So we are a services company and not a manufacturing company. So for us, the net impact rating captures impacts that maybe not the more traditional ratings always capture. I have a feeling that they sometimes are modeled on manufacturing companies, and then it's difficult for service companies to come out good. But in the net impact rating, we see our social impact, for example, that we employ a lot of people, we create jobs, we pay taxes where we operate, etc. That we get a good or very good net impact on that side. And when it comes to today's topic and the new regulations, for example, and there we struggle a little bit, being a service company with quite small environmental impact. It doesn't come out, or it's difficult for us to come out really good in that. So it's going to be interesting to see what we can do there with the net impact rating, with your help or with Uprights' help. And also we must think how it looks to investors, for example, if we can't show a great environmental or positive environmental impact or a small negative one, since we don't have that much of an environmental impact at all. So.
Thank you for sharing, Cecilia. Very much true, and I think that's also one of the kind of key reasons to complement this type of regulatory metrics with the more holistic view on getting a full picture of the
Absolutely.
impact.
Yeah.
And I think if I may also comment, thank you so much, Cecilia and Daria as well for our comments. And back to Cecilia, what you said about being maybe also a little bit confusing for companies, like if and when the investors will start to using these EU regulatory metrics more and more, what does it really mean for companies? They are very well functioning for certain companies whose improvement projects are all concentrated on, let's say, some of the key principal adverse impact indicators. But if your business is completely different, let's say the taxonomy doesn't catch it all, or its major impacts happen elsewhere, how do you communicate improvement? And could there also happen some really weird things if investors start using this data in a not so efficient way? And that's actually one of the reasons why we wanted to put this, even though we are just a small startup technology company building this model and the data, we still think it's an important kind of like societal role to like try to facilitate this discussion, because we believe in the end of the day it's not the EU who decides how this data will drive concrete incentives in the private sector, but rather it's a dialogue between the companies and the investors. And to understand how this data can and should be used, I think there is still a lot of room for a dialogue to understand how this data actually drives the world to a better endpoint. And that's why really appreciate all of you sharing your views as well, because I think this is a dialogue, especially between investors and corporations, to understand how this data should be treated. But luckily, as Toni said, it's not just the EU data we are looking at. We have other frameworks, and that's why we also do our best with our platform to always set the EU regulatory data in context of the larger picture of the net impact that tries to cover 100% of all the different impacts. And we'll actually get more to that in the second part of today's session. But before that, coming back to your questions and coming back to the little tedious task that we have given our CTO. So while he is planning on and building all of the algorithms and doing crazy things with the net impact data and also the regulatory data these days, he also has a little snack task to figure out and try to summarize these EU requirements as clearly as possible. So maybe as a first question to you, Juho, could you maybe give us like a couple of minute summary of the latest RTS came out on the 22nd last month, so a couple of weeks ago, a little bit less than that. What did it concretely say, and how should the program participants react, if in any way?
Sure, I will. I'd like to just first clarify, you're giving me a little bit too much credit there when you're saying that I'm building the data. It's rather than me, it's our data science team who is doing it, and I'm just looking around a little bit on that side. But yeah, let's look at the updated RTS. So this update to the regulatory technical standards came on 22nd October. This year, and the goal here really was to integrate the product level EU taxonomy related disclosure requirements with the SFDR technical standards to make things a little bit more simple. And the concrete changes really are, the main thing is that the product level disclosures related to EU taxonomy are now included in both the pre-contractual disclosures and the periodic reporting requirements for Article 8 and 9 funds. And in addition to this, some details have been clarified as well. And the key implication here really is that this is kind of slightly, well, as its goal was, it simplifies stuff in a sense that you have only one place where both the EU taxonomy and the SFDR related disclosures are located, but in addition to this, it moderately increases the role of the EU taxonomy for Article 8 and Article 9 funds. And yeah, so as a very short summary of the change, we will be looking at this later in more detail, but as a short summary, when, for example, looking at Article 9 funds, before, Article 9 funds only were required to indicate this kind of simple proportion of sustainable investments. So you have a certain proportion of investments that classify as sustainable, and then you have other investments, and you only disclose this proportion. Sorry. So after this change, there are some new buckets that now must be disclosed. So investments that classify as sustainable are now divided into investments with an environmental objective and investments with a social objective. And moreover, the investments with an environmental objective are further on divided, the ones that are taxonomy aligned and the ones that are not. And yeah, and this change applies to both the pre-contractual disclosures and the periodic reporting for Article 8 and Article 9 funds. In addition to this, there's also some new things, such as disclosing the proportion of investments in enabling and transitional activities. But this is the big picture on the change here. A quick note on the timeline. This is the slide that we showed you earlier, I think not in the previous session, but in the session before, where we indicated that these dates for taxonomy alignment might probably moving somewhere a little bit. So after this change, they have moved to at least July 2022. I wish I could provide you even more clarity on this, but I have to say that this date is a little bit unclear currently for everyone, because this is the date when the reporting mandate enters into force. But it might be that the reality is that the first reporting period will be 2022, and the first periodic reporting, which will actually include these figures as published, will only be required in July 2023. But this is something that we are expecting, that there will be some clarification when the regulatory technical standards are accepted, hopefully in a few months. But yeah, at least moved further along a little bit. But regardless, it's good to remember that this is only I'm not talking about the requirement to consider to report these things, but you of course need to have this information already to take this into account in your investment process. Yeah, that's about it. Tony, is there some questions already from the audience that we should address immediately before we move on to the next section?
No questions at this point, but please send questions if you have any. But Juho, you can continue.
I would like to just comment on the just the let's say the format of how the EU is giving this information. I sometimes wonder how many full-time equivalent years of highly educated people around Europe is being wasted, because the communication is just made so unclear that there's a whole, like for simple engineers like we are upright, it's very hard to understand how this creates any value, that the EU is basically giving this data in bits and pieces, and it's kind of like a puzzle you have to put together to come up with simple dates. But I know you are all struggling with this even so much more worse than we are, so no more complaining here. Just as a comment on this little deep dive into the world of public policy and regulation and legal stuff is really an adventure on its own. But, and maybe this is also a bit of an introduction to the next part as well, although hopefully Juho has made his best to make this as understandable as possible. But as said, you all know we are producing the concrete data. So when it comes to principal adverse impacts and the EU taxonomy data for all of your companies and your investments. But in addition to that, of course, the whole regulation has to do with a format that the information needs to be in, and a lot of details around that. So to make that as clear as possible for you, and Juho is now going to give you an overview of what this concretely means for companies, what this concretely means for investors. So please, Juho, the stage is yours again. Tony has a comment.
Yeah, I have a comment. Bart had a quick question before we move into the next phase. So Bart asked about, is it correct to say that the EU Sustainable Finance Regulation focuses first more on financial institutions and funds rather than the actual companies?
Well, definitely, this is one of the main criticisms, and please, everybody, correct me and compliment me if you have other experiences. But this is exactly the bit of a strange part, that for a lot of the investors, the mandates become a reality way before the companies are even reporting it. And this is also part of the reason why we have started to utilize the upright model to help investors be able to even formulate any kinds of modelings and data for the requirements. So definitely, I would say so. I don't know, you or anyone else free to comment as well to Bart's great question.
Yeah, it's certainly true, and for most of the SFDR stuff, there's no mandate at all currently
exactly.
for the indicators. So yeah, there's a kind of asymmetry there.
Yeah, and this puts the actual private sector players, such as every one of you, in a really weird situation to what to do with the requirements as the company data sort of like lags behind a little bit. I can see that we have also another question about or comment being worried about the larger role of the taxonomy in the disclosure requirements. Also understand that personally quite a bit. There's a question, when will there be clarity about this? Juho, do you know, has the EU said, I know that this RTS was something that everyone was waiting for. Is there now any clarity to when might this be? When are they updating it again or giving some?
Yeah, as a short answer, the RTS came on 22nd October, and the Commission is supposed to endorse it within 3 months, meaning it then goes into law, and at that point there might be some clarification to the schedule. So within 3 months, we would hope to have some clarity on that. Yeah.
luckily, in the meanwhile, we can still proceed with well, getting the data, making the data, and preparing the documents. But of course, the whole how this picture will play out is a bit of a mystery to everyone. Sometimes I'm a bit worried if it's a mystery to the EU as well. But let's hope for the best. So Juho, should you now jump into the disclosure requirements section?
Yeah, sure. So let's get into that and start with the requirements for the investors. Sorry. So yeah, very concretely, starting to look at what kind of concrete documents or sections within documents you investment fund managers, PE, VC managers need to start producing. So on the entity level, so let's say, for example, as manager, there's the principal adverse impact statement, which includes policies related to the principal adverse sustainable impacts, how you are taking them into account in your processes, so on. And in addition to this, there's also the figures for the principal adverse impact indicators, and these are aggregates of all the investments that the entity is for example, managing. And limited version is actually already required for the larger asset managers, and the full version will be required according to current schedule on July 2023. And yeah, this goes to the website in a specific section called Sustainability Related Disclosures. All right, then there's this doesn't have an official name. I'm calling it Taxonomy KPIs table. And what it has these taxonomy alignment related key performance indicators, which again are aggregates of the investments that the entity is managing. And in addition to this, there are some supporting figures. For example, proportion of investments to non-EU companies and non-NFRD companies, that kind of stuff. Eligibility only version from this is coming, is required from start of next year, and then the full version in 2024. And this is something that goes into the non-financial statements, and this also applies to the companies, at least currently only applies to companies that are in scope of the NFRD regulation. Then on the product level, so for example, funds, you have the pre-contractual disclosures. What this includes, in short, is and at least the most important things is the description of the sustainable investment objective, the sustainable indicators that are being used, the target asset allocation, including the proportion of sustainable investment and so on, and also explanation of how sustainability is integrated into the investment process. Related to this, there's also the website disclosures, which contain essentially the same information as the pre-contractual disclosures, but additionally some additional details, so details on methodologies, data sources, due diligence, engagement policies, limitations of methodologies and data, so on. Some kind of version required from the start of next year, and a full version that is actually in line with regulatory technical standards later on, according to current schedule in July 2022. And before that, a version that is kind of in line with the regulation general principles is sufficient. And according to regulation, the pre-contractual disclosure, this should be integrated as part of the prospectus, at least for funds that actually have a prospectus. For VC funds, it can be a little bit different. But in practice, what we have seen is that many fund managers publish this as a separate PDF next to the other documents. And the website disclosures go on the website. Then finally, there's the periodic reporting for Article 8 and 9 funds, which includes the performance of the sustainable indicators and the actual asset allocation, not just the asset allocation commitments. And then some of the same information that is also on the pre-contractual disclosures. And this will probably be starting on the 1st July 2023, assuming that the first reporting period is 2022. So again, there's some some fuzziness around the dates here. And they should go into the funds and annual report. Yeah, so this was a very, very quick overview. Next, we are going to look, because this might still be a little bit abstract, so we're going to look into some of the actual templates that the EU has provided, so you have a even deeper knowledge of what actually goes into this. We'll start with the pre-contractual disclosures. For Article 9 funds, the template for Article 8 funds is pretty similar to this one. So what you have here, and these are all screenshots from the EU templates that I'm showing you now. So this starts with a statement on having a sustainable investment objective. If you're on an Article 9 fund, you're going to be ticking the yes box here. Then, as the next thing, you have a commitment related to asset allocation. So you will state the minimum proportion of investments that have an environmental objective and the minimum proportion of investments that have a social objective. And you will be ticking a box if you, within the environmental investments, you're making investments that are not taxonomy aligned. Then there's the explanation of the sustainable investment objective and the sustainability indicators that are used to measure the attainment of the objective. Then there's explanation on how you take no significant harm into account. A little bit similar question related to how you take and whether you consider principal adverse impact indicators. This is a little bit redundant because you're supposed to take them anyway into account as part of the BNSH stuff. Then there's a question on the binding elements of the investment strategy. So as, for example, Dario earlier explained, this could, for example, be a portfolio level definition that, for example, for each investment in the portfolio, the net impact ratio must be higher than something, if you're using net impact as the sustainability indicator. And yeah, so that is an example of the binding elements. In any case, whatever you're using, you need to have some indicator that is used as a binding element for making the investment decisions for the sustainable investments, or the investments that you're classifying as sustainable. Finally, there are some more details on the asset allocation. So the minimum share of sustainable investments. Another representation showing what types of investments are making. This is in line with the picture that I showed you earlier when I was discussing the changes in the technical standards. So you have these different boxes for different types of investments. And finally, some additional details on the minimum share of taxonomy-aligned investments that you're committing into. And again, additional details on asset allocation, minimum share of investments in transitional and enabling activities as defined in the EU taxonomy regulation. Yeah. Also, more of these asset allocation related questions. And finally, explanation of investments that don't classify as sustainable. And this is essentially it. There are some questions remaining that are only relevant if you're using a benchmark to meet the sustainable investment objective, which I think most have opted not to do. And then a link to the website disclosures. So this is the pre-contractual disclosure template from the EU from Article 8 and 9 funds. There's a similar template for periodic reporting. I'm not going to go through it as in the same level of detail as I did with the Article 8 and 9 funds. It's essentially the same. The difference really is that now the asset allocation is not the commitment, it's actual asset allocation. And also another difference is that that you'll be reporting the performance of the sustainability indicator. Yeah, but otherwise it has essentially the same content as the periodic reporting or as the pre-contractual disclosure that I just showed to you. Yeah, so this is it. In addition to this, on the entity level, this is not something that we are going to look into detail, but there is this taxonomy KPIs table that looks like this. But this only applies, at least initially, to asset managers within the scope of NFRD. And this version is required only starting from 2024. A limited version that has only eligibility and 2 other metrics is needed initially. For more details, you can look at this slide when you receive the materials later on. Yeah, well, in any case, all the program participants will be getting from Upright these kind of reference templates that you can use to get started with the SFDR disclosures when you're using Upright data. So you have ready-made answers on how you can explain your sustainable objectives, how you can explain the use of sustainable indicators, do nose and harm, that kind of stuff. And yeah, just to give you an idea what these templates look like, this is the pre-contractual template. So here you will have our model answers on how you could explain, for example, the sustainability indicators or the do no significant harm related topics.
So our aim here, like Juho is showing, is basically, in addition to providing the data, to make these reporting requirements as painless as possible for you. Right now we are using these templates, but we're also looking into and actually having this discussion with many of you right now, whether you would benefit from also a full auto generation of this data. But at this point, many of you are or will be bringing the data through an API to your own systems and using the structured format there. But let's keep up the open dialogue of what helps you even more. We are being super pragmatic when it comes to this EU regulatory point. Our value proposition for you is to help you do this properly and in a lean way at the same time. So let's stay in close dialogue of what kind of help you would want. And we are typically pretty good at fast digital execution. So that's what we can then help you with.
Yeah, exactly. So moving on to companies. As already mentioned earlier today, with companies, this is a little bit more simple. So companies don't have requirements related to the SFDR regulation. There's only the EU taxonomy stuff that they need to disclose. So there's EU taxonomy templates that includes these key performance indicators of companies, essentially. Or in the EU lingo, non-financial undertakings. But of course, as Annu will discuss later today, in addition to disclosing this, it's probably helpful to also disclose other impact related information. But yeah, let's look at the company template very quickly. So this is what the template essentially looks like. There is 3 versions of this. One which is for alignment according to turnover, and another which is for where you calculate alignment based on capital expenditures, and another one where you calculate alignment based on operating expenditures. But they are otherwise exactly the same. So what you have in this template, you have as rows, you have the list of taxonomy aligned activities. Then you have the list of activities that are taxonomy eligible but not aligned. And then you have the turnover of taxonomy non-eligible activities. In the columns, you have turnover, both absolute and proportion. Then you have the proportion of turnover that contributes to different taxonomy objectives. Usually you will have one activity contributing to only one objective, but can also be multiple objectives theoretically. Then there is information on the passage of DNSH criteria. So there are different DNSH criteria, and then you have the letter Y there. They're essentially always, because if you're not passing any DNSH criteria, then you would not be in this row, and you would instead be listed in the taxonomy eligible, but not aligned activities. So these columns here don't add much information, really. Finally, there's the information on whether the activity is transitional or enabling or neither. One quick note, there's no need to report the substantial contribution or the DNSH details for non-aligned activities. And as a more interesting note, it's possible to report a proportion of a given activity as aligned and another proportion of the same activity as not aligned. So if you have, for example, an aluminum manufacturer that has two production lines, and one of those production lines is so environmentally efficient that it is taxonomy aligned, and the other production line is not, you can report the other proportion as aligned and the other proportion of not aligned. This makes a lot of sense, but this also has kind of interesting and I think a little bit funny implications, meaning that the choices related to how you decide to draw the boundaries within activities will affect the reported taxonomy alignment. So sticking to the example of the aluminum company, we have this, I have prepared this example of an aluminum company here for you, which has 4 different products. The first product is manganese blended aluminum that they use for aerospace applications, or that is being used for aerospace applications. Then there's zinc blended aluminum, also for aerospace applications, and manganese blended aluminum for car parts, and zinc blended aluminum for car parts. And as you can see on the slides, these different products have a little bit different GHG intensities. So, for example, production of this manganese blended aluminum for aerospace applications, the GHG intensity is 2,000 tons of CO2 equivalent emissions per ton of aluminum. And then for the zinc blended aluminum for car parts, it's only 1,000. So different GHG intensities here. And the technical screening criteria in the Taxonomy Delegated Act says that for manufacturing of aluminum to be aligned, the GHG emissions should not exceed 1,484 tons of CO2 equivalent emissions per ton of aluminum manufactured. So if you look at this company as an aggregate, you will learn that the aggregate GHG intensity is 1,630, which is more than the limit in the technical screening criteria, meaning that if you look at this activity as a whole, you would end up as a total alignment of 0. However, if you look at, for example, as just this one product as one activity, so drawing the boundary there, you will have that aligned since 1,000 is less than 1,484, and the total alignment of the company would be 25%. However, you can also draw these boundaries differently. You can, for example, think as car parts as one activity or one part where you look at the activity. When you do it like this, you will have this activity is going to be aligned as well, and the total alignment would be 40%. Same thing, if you draw the boundaries differently based on whether it's zinc blended or manganese blended, the zinc blended aluminum production activity is going to be aligned, and you get even higher number of alignment. Finally, there would be this option of a kind of a convenient boundaries approach, where you end up with a total alignment of 65%, and being on aggregate at 1,431, which is just below the limit in the technical screening criteria. So yeah, I'm just highlighting this, that there are these kind of, even when you have perfect information on the company, these kind of decisions on how you decide to draw these boundaries can affect what you're going to report as the final alignment. And I'm curious to see whether there will be some additional definitions on how you should be drawing these boundaries to make these numbers more comparable. But yeah, this was just as a kind of a deep dive side note on what kind of problems or what kind of intricacies you can have here when reporting alignment. Great. I have talked so much, so maybe could be time to let someone else talk. So one thing that, given that I have now given you all this information on what the requirements are, it's good to answer the question how Upright can help now and in the future. So maybe Annu, if you can help me a little bit with this and answer that question for the audience.
Sure. So maybe, as I said before, the approach we're taking with the whole EU regulatory data, as Juho was going through the details just now, at least in my head, I was like, oh my God, what kind of value is this creating for the humanity to do this kind of number tweaking and framing. But in any case, this is a part of the requirements that are a part of the reality. So as said, our approach is pragmatic. Obviously, we provide the data because that's what you have most been asking from us, and that's the concrete thing that need to be produced. Then when it comes to packaging these in the various formats that you have just presented, basically, we don't believe this will be the 2020s benchmark of how impact is being discussed, will necessarily be driven by the EU. About those benchmarks or what good best practices, what good really looks like, that's going to be the topic of our next section. But very briefly, also to comply with these regulations, we are either providing you the templates, or that those we are providing in any case, like you had just showed, but we're also looking into a possibility to do that in a fully automated reporting suite, if that's something that then would fit your needs. So this is something we are now in discussions with you, and we will be making a decision about whether to put some coding resources into this as well. And we'll keep you all posted. And you can also send us your requests about the processes that you prefer within your organizations, because I know many of you have different viewpoints for that. Cool, but maybe now let's try to dig ourselves out from the EU regulatory hole of the templates and the data in general, and let's dive into the other part of our content that we'll be looking at for the next 30 minutes or so, which is what is then 2020's caliber impact reporting really like? Let's start with some expectations and some requirements. So it is pretty unlikely that any of you in this seminar today, or any of your colleagues or peers or competitors, will be building a significant competitive advantage with their eligibility or alignment percentages reported in a 70-page EU mandated document. So the bar is really so much higher. Of course, you need to do that, and of course, you need to report in it. But you also need to really put this information in a format that speaks to your stakeholders. If you're a company, you need to understand how you tell your holistic impact story in a way that your stakeholders, whether they're your investors, your employees, your clients, the wider public, are basically understand what you're doing, are inspired by it, and find the information they're looking for in a comparable format. And then again, if you're an investor, the bar for communicating a fund's impact is so much higher than it was 5 years ago. It's not enough anymore to just put a nice little green stamp on top and hope that it flies, but rather stakeholders are becoming increasingly critical, demanding, and smart. So these are we sometimes use these 5 requirements as a sort of rule of thumb here at Upright when we work together with our clients. So you all know, first of all, obviously just anecdotal data or qualitative data is not enough and has not been enough for a couple of years already, but we need quantitative metrics. As seen now in some of these EU data examples, and as you have seen so many times with traditional ESG data or more modern impact data, comparability is extremely difficult, and you need to really put some resources into producing numbers that don't just look scientific because there's a lot of decimals, but that actually tell something meaningful. And not just quantitative metrics on the minuses, such as for example, the EU principal adverse impacts are mainly concentrated on the negative side, as the name suggests, but also be able to quantify the plus side, because this is the only way for your audience to understand how you actually create value, what goes in and what comes out, what is the net sum of the costs and gains that your company or your fund has on the surrounding world. This is a big challenge compared to what was asked, let's say 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. Then, of course, we also need to be able to look at these various frameworks and data. We cannot just say that the EU data is stupid, we don't do it. We're obligated to report it anyways. And then we're facing problems like Cecilia was outlining at the beginning of the session, that if your company isn't exactly doing its most active parts in whatever the EU is highlighting right now, how do you differentiate? How do you show your progress and so on? So that's why it's important to set these frameworks in a context that that somehow tells what's big and what's not. Linking to your financial risk and opportunities, not just having your impact as a separate story, and comparing not just across within the industries, which is the sort of traditional ESG style, is to see that which of the tobacco companies least bad. And so that allows me to choose what I choose from this sector. But we need to be able to also compare industries or sub-industries against another to understand the holistic value creation mechanisms that industries also share, and not just look at the best house on the bad street. And then, of course, a topic we will go into in our next section is the question about how to communicate the change, not just looking at a snapshot of today or 5 years ago, but rather showing how our concrete actions lead to improvements in our impact. But you don't just have to take our comments at face value. This is we are really happy to see that also the European authorities are starting to demand more and more of this. Valtteri, who is being leading our development of these impact storylines for many of our corporation clients. Can you actually, Valtteri, share us a little bit? You were active in following the EFRAG new report. So can you maybe summarize for us what the EFRAG is outlining there regarding the requirements?
Yeah, sure. So there was an interesting report published by EFRAG, the European Financial Reporting Advisory Group, just actually last month on sustainability reporting. So basically, they put up this 100-page report to map the current state of reporting of sustainability risks and opportunities, especially related to business models and total value creation of companies. So it's good to note that this report does not have an authoritative status. So EFRAG is the same party that's also preparing the CSRD, which then has an authoritative status, but they wanted to publish this kind of report already beforehand, just for companies to get ideas on how to improve and understand this kind of business model risk and opportunities reporting side better. The CSRD then in turn is expected to be enforced by end 2022 only, but they already wanted to show some interesting stuff on impact reporting even beforehand. But we've summarized the report on the next page. Interestingly, it's many of the same things Annu already mentioned, so I'm not going to repeat the same things, and you'll of course get this material later on. But just to highlight a couple of points they also emphasized was exactly this kind of linking risks and opportunities with your business model. That was lacking in almost all the current reporting that companies have, annual reports, sustainability reports, etc. Other thing, the balanced perspective between positive and negative impacts. So not only seeing sustainability as a restraint and a risk that should be mitigated. And maybe third point to raise indeed this kind of quantification, linking sustainability risks and opportunities with financial objectives, and not having this kind of separated sustainability risk section that is not linking with the financial performance at all. And not surprisingly, they then suggested several areas of improvement regarding these challenges. But maybe, I don't know if any reflections on this one, or should I give the stage back to Annu to talk about what is our answer and vision to these observed challenges in the sustainability and impact reporting.
Excellent. Thanks, Valtteri. It's always good to hear, since we know that we are quite ambitious here at Upright, and our ambition for how really impact reporting looks like for investors and companies. Our vision is pretty strong there. So it's good every now and then to sanity check with the authorities and see what they are saying of what good looks like, how they are approaching third-party data. As we have been discussing in these sessions, we see it not just as an option, but rather something that needs to take place if we are to in any way, in a sort of comprehensive way, to even comply with just the regulation, let alone understand some of the other important areas of impact. So great to see that the the authorities are also roughly on the same page with us when it comes to how the bar is being risen. But now, as a sort of final bigger section today, we thought that we would share a concrete storyline for an impact reporting, sort of 2020's impact reporting for a company or for a fund. Since we have been so heavily focused on the viewpoint of investors in these sessions up until now, this will be more told from the perspective of a corporation, but actually the storyline and the logic is exactly the same for funds as well. So you might be hearing this from whichever perspective is closer to you. We thought we might, because we've been asked to do this quite many times in the past couple of years, and especially increasingly so actually this fall. So it seems like this autumn has been for many investors a time maybe pushed by the EU regulatory requirements to also look at their impact reporting with completely new lenses and completely new eyes. So this has been something that we've been now working on with many investors and many companies. So we pulled together our process of 6 steps of building a impact storyline. And we thought we might go through it with an example today. But basically, the 6 steps, it's quite a simple storyline to build. We very strongly recommend starting with a concise and candid overview of where you are right now, talking about your largest, most significant positive and negative impacts to build an overview. And this is super important, that this is now then a MISI, so mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive picture of your impact. So it's not just cherry picking a couple of stories that, hey, we help the nature here, and then there's also this, as these kinds of stories, but it actually aims to give an honest picture of where you stand from the get-go. Then not just showing your picture, but showing somehow putting this in context by comparing it to some of your peers, their peer companies, or maybe other funds, indexes, maybe the aggregate level profile of a stock exchange that you might be listed in, or that you could be listed in, or listed on. Thirdly, always remember to speak the language of your audience. So if your audience is, for example, looking at the UN SDGs as a framework that they typically use, just integrate it there, show what the data looks like, but don't get carried away, so that you are all the time kind of like rooted in that one main framework of impact, while adding those stories that, or those lenses to your impact as well that are required. Of course, number 4, tying in the EU regulatory data that comes as a no surprise in this forum. And as a fifth step, perhaps the most difficult step, which is then showing your progress in time. This is in theory, this is easy to say, hey, your net impact ratio used to be this and now it's better. But in reality, the details have to do with linking your concrete improvement projects and your concrete actions, whether they are strategic investments or company, or maybe changes to your investment strategy as a fund, tying those to your net impact profile to show how you are concentrating on the largest things and not just things that might sound good, but you don't really know how big of an impact they actually have. And then finally, of course, communicating them in formats that your stakeholders are using and being super pragmatic there. If it's social media, if it's your annual report, whatever it might be, dress the data appropriately for those forums. But maybe if we go quickly through these steps. So number one, as I said, start by simply listing your largest negative and positive impacts. That means, in a sense, building your value creation model, or not building, but sharing your value creation model. It means that you are not just telling the things that are today sound good to you, or that today you are proud of, or picking a little bit of there and a little bit of there, but really not underestimating your stakeholders and being the one who says the largest negatives first. Because if you say them first, you are such in a better position than waiting to be butchered in social media or criticized by your stakeholders for not raising them. It's the same logic applies in a lot of situations in business. And I think this is a great example where you should be the one outlining your biggest negatives before someone else does it for you. Second, stick to your core business, no matter how tempting it is to talk about charity or other side projects, or maybe how your office is going greener, or how you're compensating the emissions of your headquarters or something like that. Stick to your core business, otherwise your stakeholders will just simply question your integrity and your rigor of your analysis and of your reporting. Thirdly, remember to look at the whole value chain, and especially remember that your largest impacts, depending a little bit, of course, what industry you're in, but in almost every case, they can be found in downstream. So downstream meaning not just looking at internally what happens within your facilities, with what happens inside your company or inside the companies you have invested in, but rather what happens in the value chains. Let's look at, for example, a car manufacturer. Their largest emissions are most likely happening when the cars are actually being driven on the streets. That's a downstream impact. They may or may not be covered by their scope 3, depending a little bit on the reporting. But as we talked about last time and the time before that, the company disclosures themselves might not always cover everything. So make sure you really look at the holistic value chain of your company and tell the big picture of how you create value in the world, what you get done, and what you cause on the negative side. And finally, as a fourth point, link your impact with your financial risks and opportunities. So the days of just telling your impact story in a separate section, for example, in your annual report, and then having your financial story completely separately is simply over, because these are the topics that are causing many of the major risks for you financially, as we will soon see in some of the examples. And final note, this is our recommendation for all of you, and where we also love to help our clients if they wish so, is to be refreshingly honest. It is just simply the only way to win in these days. Impact communications is just simply start by outlining. Don't try to sugarcoat everything, but just start by where we are today, and then give an honest outline of what you are doing to improve every day. Your stakeholders are smarter and smarter every day, and they will check the facts if you don't do it yourselves, or if you try to position something in a greener light than what is reality. So if we look at a concrete example, this is now a really not a sexy example, but a really basic industrial equipment company in a sanitized format, but basically just outlining, yeah, let's look at it. Everybody can see it's the environmental side that is the largest cost. Comes as little surprise. This is for them, it's mainly steel production, steel manufacturing in their upstream and the emissions that have to do with it. But then at the same time, why this company exists doesn't have to do with the left-hand side, but rather has to do with the right-hand side and the largest impacts there. And in their case, their critical role in contributing to societal infrastructure and making our global industrial logistics work, which is then again enabling our hospitals and schools to run and roads to be built and so on and so on. This is your honest outline that we recommend to start with, and then linking also your business risks and opportunities to it. For example, in their case, I highlighted the emission part being their major negative impact. And obviously there, in case of an increase in carbon cost, that is not just a bad thing for the world, but that's obviously a business risk for them if they don't succeed in working with this largest negative impact and making it smaller continuously. Good. As a second step is then setting this profile and this visual in context with others. So seeing what does this look like compared to our peers, different kinds of indexes or groups that we could be comparing to. We now chose actually a Swedish example, Vattenfall, which is a Swedish energy company, a government-owned company in our lovely neighboring country, Sweden. And this is now a hypothetical example how Vattenfall, for example, could be viewing themselves. They might be looking at a peer, now another European energy company, Enel from Italy, actually, seeing what kinds of differences arise. In their case, Vattenfall's product portfolio is clearly more emphasized on the non-fossil side than Enel's, which shows clearly in their differences in their environmental categories, as well as health category 2 through the fossil fuel burning and their health implications. But then also looking at some larger groups that you might want to draw this into. Now, Vattenfall is not a listed company since it's a government-owned company in Sweden, but maybe the most relevant stock exchange for it could be then in its home country, the OMX Stockholm. Maybe looking at what do we add to these types of a peer group of companies in Sweden, for example. What kind of a profile do we add the picture? Or looking at in a even more broad perspective, looking at the Euro Stoxx 50 and explaining their value creation story, comparing to the 50 large European companies listed in that index. Of course, the same comparison is also equally relevant for funds. And I was thinking maybe this is easier, Toni, if we show it in the Upright platform. So would you mind maybe showing how you would go about creating some comparison points for a fund in the Upright platform?
Yeah, happy to. So welcome to Upright platform. I just opened Fidelity Contra Fund here from the platform. It's one of the largest actively managed equity funds in the world, investing mainly to US growth stocks. But here you can see their net impact profile here. But today we are looking at the comparison side, so comparing Fidelity to different indices. So given that it's investing in companies in US, it might make sense to compare it to S&P 500, like we've done here. You can instantly see the differences in value creation between these two groups of companies. For instance, Fidelity Contra Fund contributes much more to the health of people, uses a bit less environmental resources than the S&P 500. On the other hand, we might want to do another comparison as well. For instance, let's compare it now to European companies. And here, I guess the storyline is similar, but it's just a bit more extreme, the differences, especially on the use of environmental resources. Of course, here it could be interesting to go deeper into the Eurostoxx 50 and see, well, what is driving the negative impact there, but let's not do that right now. Lastly, something I'd like to show you, you can take any group from the model. There's plenty of those, and kind of make these comparisons. Now I pulled up S&P 500 ESG index, and here the profiles are already quite similar, but you can still see differences here. What's the highlight here is that rather than looking at the Fidelity Contra Fund as such, it might be hard to say whether we are good or not. It makes sense to put it in context. So decide on what is the relevant index and compare your fund to that one, so you can kind of have an honest comparison and benchmark around it.
And I love that this is also at the same time a really delicate and stylish thing from Tony to the traditional ESG data versus maybe some more forward-looking impact data, seeing that Fidelity Contra Fund, which is not known for its impact, but rather for its good basic financial performance, is here outperforming the S&P 500 ESG group. Just as a general note, always makes it pays off to be awake when somebody says something is ESG. Does not necessarily mean its net impact is positive. But that's a whole other discussion. But I love that you chose it here to go through. Cool. I will pick up the pace, seeing that we only have about 13 minutes left and we have so many to cover. So just shortly, remember to speak the language of your audience. The UN SDGs we've been discussing with so many of you. Some of you might know how I personally feel about them not being the best framework for measuring impact. However, it does make sense if, for example, your LPs are looking at them, your investors are asking for them, just add them there. Doesn't make sense to waste energy in having that fight. But remember to do a couple of things. First of all, don't just go into the bad habit of sticker collection, SDG sticker collecting, but at least link them to your net impact profile to let the audience to see what is big and what is not. While we are pursuing SDG X, this is what it really looks like, and this is what is broad in our activities right now. And to make this data more high quality and meet the standards that we would like to see happen in the world, we have also built some SDG data ourselves, as many of you might know. So basically 2 things that we would like to challenge and take the next level when it comes to SDGs and using them in communicating impact. One of them is not just looking at the positive contribution, but also measuring the negative contribution at the same time. So being honest about, while pursuing SDG X, the same activities are doing maybe harm to SDGs Y and Z, being very honest about this and showing it. And second of all, not just looking at complete companies that like, does Nokia contribute to X or Y, but rather looking at one level deeper. So looking at the product level, what do the different businesses and the products actually get done? So these are the 2 things we have aimed to make happen in this example that Tony is now showing off a Finnish energy sector company, Fortum, in this example, as I see. Isn't this Fortum, Tony?
Yeah. So we are looking at Fortum, the Finnish energy company. So as we can see, just pick up the from Upright platform the SDG data. So here you can see both the positive revenue contribution to SDGs, but also the negative one. So it's not so kind of having both the pluses and minuses here as well. And you can also see a bit deeper on what type of products are driving the different contribution on both positive and negative side. So in this case, we are looking at an individual company, and you can see pluses and minuses. But you can of course do the same thing for a fund or for a or index or so on and so forth. So here I pulled up Eurostoxx 50, and you can see the same metrics on fund level as well. And here, for instance, we can see a negative contribution on good health and well-being. Well, Eurostoxx 50 has multiple companies producing alcohol and beer, and that's I guess that's kind of obvious, but you can see it here. Just to mention, of course, it might make sense to also look at all of the 17 SDGs just to get a bit of a better view. So that's of course also possible. this goes to say that this data might be useful to look at when you are thinking of bringing in these SDG stickers to your value creation story and kind of sanity checking whether it makes sense to have those stickers on. So yeah, just a quick snapshot from the model.
Excellent. And as a fourth step in our 6-step process of building a 2020 storyline for your impact story, tie in the EU regulatory data. Comes as a little surprise at this point of the session, but be honest about what is the kind of format that makes sense. If you are talking about, for example, Securitas, whose maybe main projects are not being presented via the PI indicators the best way, then just show them what they are, be honest, no, it doesn't make any sense to hide them, of course, and you put some resource into getting them, but also be honest, like what is left out. Typically, when you look at simply from the PI indicators, they don't tell a whole lot about what the resources are being used for, what is happening on the plus side. So this is just simply a lens for the minus side and a subset of things on the minus side at the same time. That's why it's really important to always put these absolute points that the PI indicators are giving in a context of what is big and what is not. I don't know, Toni, if we have time, but just very, very briefly show in the model. But basically what we have built here in the net impact profile, we would like to always put the data points in the context of what is big and what is not. So now, for example, looking at this might be, Nestle is our model citizen. It's maybe almost in every session. Apparently, it's our favorite child right now. But anyways, showing the scope 1 and 2 and 3 direct company disclosures, if they exist. In this case, they exist for 1 and 2. And then the upright model estimate for scope 3. I guess they publish something, but not on a high enough level for the scope 3. But basically showing these absolute values so that they don't always also get you derailing, but showing them as part of the holistic net impact tree of showing the scale of things. But maybe now, given our time right now, maybe we should give Valtteri a chance to use the couple of next minutes on answering one of the questions that was also interesting to many of you, which is then the 5th step of the process. So how do you show progress in time? We take a pretty simple approach. You need to communicate your ambition. So what are you doing to improve concretely? So link this to your strategic projects and investments, or then for a fund, this would be your investment strategy and what kind of investment you're looking for, and show them as a part of your net impact profile. Then after the change has happened, whether it's an investment period or a period or for a couple of years in a company, show where your projects got you and reflect honestly about whether you got where you wanted to be. Valtteri, could you give us a concrete example to put some concreteness behind this idea?
Yeah, sure. I'll try to go through in 2 minutes. So basically, this is again a sanitized example, a generalized example now of a construction company. So basically, we've selected the 5 main strategic impact targets set for the company back in time. They might be around energy efficiency, reducing emissions of internal operations, but also expanding to new greener business lines like wood-based building. Also downstream stuff like aspiration to grow in an attractive healthcare segment that's also has a good impact and foreseeable to grow in the future. So many different aspects of internal, but also upstream and downstream related improvement projects. So the first step to do is to basically map them to your overall impact. Why? To understand that what is the impact we are actually trying to achieve, and also try to understand that what is big and what is small, and what is the starting point. So this is basically the net impact profile then back in time. Then if you fast forward 5 years, you can basically understand that when your core business is changing, when your product mix is changing, when your customer segments are changing, when your suppliers are changing and raw materials used are changing, what is the impact in each of these categories? For example, if I pick the D, growing of the new wood-based business, and then leading to improvement of the positive environmental score because it replaces some of the more GHG intensive building businesses. So basically, this is the way to see that how each of these projects contributes to your impact, and then if you want to call it the bottom line, what happens to your overall impact. Again, fast forwarding to fund level. So this is then a different example, but we also want to illustrate that this is equally positive at the fund level to track your performance in time. However, here the changes leading to the impact changes, not only the business changes in your portfolio companies. It is of course that it's all the initiatives done there, it's the M&A done there, it's the growth happening there, but it's also your portfolio level changes like investments into new companies, divestments of companies, and then of course relative growth of your portfolio companies. So this is also a way to understand that what is the impact you're achieving in your like aggregated level on your, let's say, 30 to 50 portfolio companies. But this was in very briefly, and I'll give the mic then back to Annu to recap and close this section.
Thanks, Valtteri. This is a super interesting example. We might be coming back to it in the coming sessions as well. But just to close our 6-step process. So then number 6, obviously, put this data in a format that your stakeholders want. Be very pragmatic. So use whatever works well and what your stakeholders are looking for. One of the formats that our clients have been really using lately is this net impact scorecard that we've built for them, both on the company and the fund side, which basically just combines the elements we just went through, but also gives it a rating that maybe people can recognize from the credit rating world. So putting it in the format of, let's say, BB plus or AA minus or something like that, so that people recognize and get a feeling of what is good and what is not. So what do everybody else get, and where do we stand here? So this is one of the possible formats. And then when it comes to the forums where you are actually sharing this data, many of you are using it as part of your annual reports, and that's something that we're also working on, building this storyline as a part of an annual report, and maybe also combining the investor relations story there and not having it as a separate impact value creation story. Or some of you might have your separate sustainability reporting as well. Or then just go on social media. For example, in recruiting comms, it might be that the best format or the best forum to reach the audience you want is actually in social media or somewhere else where the brand of your company is being built. But this is just like the pragmatic last step of the process then, to find the audience and not just do great analysis and leave it unshared. I can see that we have exactly 1 minute or 30 seconds time. I saw a lot of great questions, especially on the SDGs. So let's take a mental note, Toni and Valtteri and Juho, to cover the SDGs maybe in either the next or the session after that. But Toni, can you briefly recap for us some of the next steps?
Yes, happy to. So two points to share. First off, about the upcoming events. So in 2 weeks, we have a session on leveraging the Upright platform to navigate the regulation and impact space. So focusing on the tools and how to utilize them. That's number one thing to remember. And the second thing, for all of you participants, we will continue the data production process one-on-one. So we'll continue on that side. And that's also when we can answer the SDG questions you asked about just in the chat. So yeah, really happy to continue, but those are the two things to remember. But yeah, that's it from my side.
And of course, all the data work continues with each and every one of you in our individual streams. Keep the great questions coming, challenge us for next time as well. And until that, have a great November. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye.